Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be continuing my 13 Days of Halloween series with the late October horror movie of the year, and that is Pray for the Devil. And if you follow any horror movies during October every single year, you know that the one that comes out closest to Halloween is usually the worst one because, you know, they're trying to capitalize on getting all the money possible over the holiday weekend, but don't have a movie that will have the legs enough to sustain itself over the entire month of October like Smile did. I think Smile had a lot of great qualities. It's doing extremely well at the box office and has found a lot of success. If this movie came out at the beginning of October like that one did, this movie would have failed completely. It's going to try to get as many people in as possible opening weekend, and it probably will do some decent business. It'll probably make its money back because this movie seems like a very low budget, simple, you know, horror movie that's PG-13 that will draw in all those younger audience members. And I think that this movie is not as bad as the ones in the past that try to follow the same formats, but it's not a good movie by any means. So we are going to be getting into spoilers for Pray for the Devil. So if you have not seen the movie or you don't care about spoilers because, you know, I'm talking about Pray for the Devil, then just stick around. Let's just jump right into this thing. I'll start off by saying that I don't think this movie is completely devoid of any good ideas because I think the inherent concept of this movie is actually pretty decent. It follows the main character who is a nun and she wants to be able to perform exorcisms. She goes to this exorcism school. Although she's not able to go into the actual classes themselves, she still wants to learn. She's very curious, but because, you know, she is a woman, she's not allowed to be a priest, and only priests can be able to perform exorcisms for the church. So this movie has a very active protagonist of wanting to learn these different things. She's very curious. She wants to help this little girl. She's full of empathy, and she's trying to do different things that the church does not do. She wants to do it in a different way because she is different from everybody else who would perform exorcisms. So again, base level of a good idea. It's just all about execution. And let me paint a little picture of how this movie starts and why this movie just kind of fails completely for me. The movie begins with the main character talking to her therapist, and you get to see flashes back to, you know, her childhood with her mother and how her mother was possessed, and you also get to see flashes of her, you know, daily life, going to the church, doing all these different things as she was having that conversation with this, you know, therapist of hers. And so anytime there's a conversation in this movie that's full of exposition, you get to see flashes of different things that are happening in the lives of the main character, kind of over explaining things, trying to rush through that setup in order to get to the creepy scare sequences of the character, like walking down a hallway, hearing a noise, turning around and seeing something in the background, because it just wants to get to that it completely fails at the setup of this movie. And I think another movie that happened earlier this year did the same thing is Morbius. It feels like a very similar to start of this movie as Morbius did. And so this movie does definitely feel like that PG-13 horror movie that was probably made possibly to be rated R. Maybe it was cut up to be like an hour and 28 minutes PG-13 horror movie that had maybe a good idea of why it was made, which was that original script. But I feel like that original script, even if it was any good, is just nowhere to be found in this movie because I think its ideas and its themes are just not big enough, not kind of in depth enough for it to even really matter. In terms of what this movie is trying to say, I guess it's trying to say something about shame and guilt and how, you know, the people that feel the most shame and guilt, who are devout to their religions, are the ones that are most open to possession, are the ones that open up themselves up to the devil. And so that is what happens to most of the characters that are possessed throughout this entire movie. And it's about, you know, kind of accepting that shame and knowing that God will love you no matter what because of your faith, not because of the things that define you in your past. So the shame and guilt that the main character faces in this movie is the fact that she had a baby when she was 15 and had to give up this baby, but most of the shame that she feels is of having the baby in the first place, of having sex and having that whole situation happen. But I feel like most of the guilt should be in her having to give up her child, not the fact that she had sex before marriage, which is what this movie tries to kind of push a little bit too hard. And there's another scene that with a rape victim that was just kind of like, I don't know what they were trying to say with that, and I'm afraid to kind of figure out what they were trying to say with that, but it didn't work. So every time this movie was trying to have something to say about, you know, about those certain elements of guilt and shame, I thought it was just way too hollow and didn't even go far enough to really even matter, to a point where I kind of wish none of that was in the movie, because then it just wouldn't feel as hollow. It just would have filled the void of those things. But if you're not seeing them, then you're not kind of putting attention to it. So maybe it's better to just not have it at all in this movie. But I don't know, it just really didn't work for me. But I think by far the worst part of this film is the fact that it's supposed to be a horror movie, and this movie was not scary in the slightest. I think most of its scare sequences ended up kind of being goofy and silly because, you know, it is an exorcism movie. We've seen so many movies about exorcisms in the past to a point where every single time one of these happens, it really has to be extremely well directed and well made for it to have any effect to it, like the original Conjuring movie did. You know, we had seen a lot of exorcism movies before The Conjuring came out, but The Conjuring did it so well and it was so intense that it ended up winning winning over fans for this genre or for this subgenre of horror that have kind of given up on this, you know, subgenre. And so at this point, we're kind of back at that point where we have these exorcism scenes that feel like they have to be so big and do some really weird and wacky things that it just kind of stops being scary and starts being goofy. A couple examples is there's this old guy in the movie that starts to dance with the main character, and he sticks his tongue out and it starts like flapping around. It's like super long and it's just really gross and just weird, and just I ended up laughing at that scene. There's another scene where, you know, the main characters all go down to the catacombs. There's this little girl that is being possessed and they have to do this exorcism on her, and the thoughts of scare sequences are seeing her kind of like glitch up the wall, which in terms of exorcisms in this movie and possessions, this movie treats it as if there's like a possessed person around every single street corner, so it's so openly available to priests to be able to practice exorcisms on just at any given point. But when they're doing the exorcism on this little girl, which you find out is the daughter of the main character, there's a lot of weird things, like she covers her eyes at one point and then the back of her hands break open and maggots start crawling out of it, or at one point the hair gets sucked in her mouth and all these priests are trying to pull it out, and this is featured heavily in the trailer. But once they get the hair out of her mouth, a hand sticks out of her mouth and like pulls the hair back down. It's like, what is this is not scary, this is just really goofy. There's a lot of CG enhancements to these possession scenes that just don't work. There's even a part where her back is bent completely backwards, she's kind of folded in half, something that we've definitely seen before, but it was never scary because there's never any good tension in this movie to begin with. The only scene that had somewhat tension to it was one that kind of fell apart because of its themes, which is when, you know, the main character wants to try to pull off an exorcism on Father Dante's sister, who is like, she was a rape victim. She had her pregnancy was ended poorly because, you know, she lost the baby. And so they're there. This fan is spinning really fast and her stomach starts like, you know, bulging out as if she was pregnant again. You see like this handprint on her stomach. There was some tension in there, even though it makes no sense because the fan is just spinning really, the devil's making the fan spin fast, I guess. And the fan is like breaking apart and shooting things across the room. But at least that added some tension to the actual sequence, and the visuals of it were kind of creepy, but the thematic elements of it just fell flat for me. And so it just, whenever this movie tried to do anything remotely scary, it just didn't work. And by the time you got to the end of the movie where you're supposed to care about these characters, like I said, the characterization of this main character wasn't executed well enough for me to care by the end of the movie that it is her daughter, that she wants to kind of take the devil from this daughter because she feels like she kind of got away with things when she was younger because of her mom with the same devil. And so there's reasons, I guess, for us to care by the end of the movie, but they're just kind of running around these creepy catacombs. And I just didn't care whatsoever. But to kind of wrap up my thoughts on this movie, I'll mention one more sequence that I thought was really funny that just didn't really make sense at all and just kind of illustrates how chopped up this movie feels. And it's part where after the whole thing with Dante's sister happens, that exorcism goes bad, she gets banished from the school, she goes back to her home little area, she decides to no longer perform exorcisms, and she finds out that that little girl that they had, you know, tried to do the exorcism on earlier on in the movie is miraculously healed. The devil is no longer possessing her, and she's now fine. She went home, and not 2 minutes later after that scene, Dante shows up and says that she has relapsed and has murdered 2 people in this ambulance sequence. She like lit a priest and this other, you know, paramedic on fire, and just they all died a horrific death, and now they have this little girl in the catacombs of this school. It's like, what? How do we get here? Why is this happening? What is this connection? And then you find out that it's the daughter, and just gets a little convoluted. Just like, what did this movie become? What happened to the basic idea, the story that actually did work in this thing? It was just buried under whatever this mess ended up being. And it's not a good movie. It has some interesting ideas. I don't think it's completely unwatchable. I think if you watch this as a younger audience, just to see some scary movie just for fun, maybe you'll jump once or twice. I don't know. There's a dream sequence with a good jump scare, I guess, but that's about it. So those are my thoughts on Pray for the Devil. What did you guys think about it? If you saw it, and if you didn't see it, I'm not surprised. So comment down below your thoughts on Pray for the Devil, and also subscribe to the channel to see more reviews just like this one. I'm still doing my 13 Days of Halloween series. I'll be doing The Cabinet of Curiosities, which comes out very soon on Netflix, and I'm very excited to talk about that. And also Wendell in the Wild, which is the Jordan Peele, Henry Selick animated stop motion movie that just looks really, really cool. So I can't wait to watch that one and review that one as well. So subscribe to the channel, leave a like, comment down below, and I hope to see you all in my next one.